The lunch table went quiet the way a room goes quiet before something breaks. Marcus Vale set down his milk carton, leaned across the scarred laminate, and looked at the new boy with the kind of grin that had never once been wiped off his face by a teacher, a coach, or a parent. The new boy was small, for 14, narrow through the shoulders, with a thrift store hoodie, 2 sizes too big, and the wary stillness of someone who had learned that holding still made you a smaller target. He had said 5 words. He had not meant them as a threat. He had meant them as a hope, the way a drowning person reaches for any plank in the water. And Marcus Vale laughed. He laughed once, loud and certain, and the sound bounced off the cafeteria walls, and the boys around him laughed because Marcus laughed, and the new boy felt the old heat climb his neck. He did not know yet that the laugh would be the last easy thing Marcus Vale ever did at that school. He did not know that a phone was already in a backpack 2 tables over, recording. He only knew that he had said the truest thing he owned, and the biggest kid in the 8th grade had found it funny. His name was Eli Renner, and he had been at Cedar Hollow Middle School for 9 days. 9 days was long enough to learn the geography of fear. He knew which hallway to avoid between 3rd and 4th period. He knew that the boys' bathroom near the gym belonged to Marcus and his circle, the way a watering hole belongs to the biggest animal. He knew that the lunch monitor, a tired man named Mr. Saul Pell, watched the doors and not the tables, and that whatever happened at the tables was a country with no law. Eli had moved to the town of Black Fork with his mother in the last week of August into a rented half of a duplex that smelled of someone else's cigarettes, and he had understood within a day that he had traded one hard place for another. His mother, Dana, worked 2 shifts at the regional hospital, scrubbing floors and emptying bins on the night rotation, and she came home at dawn with her hands cracked and her eyes the color of old bruises. There was a routine to their mornings that they both pretended was a kind of breakfast. She came in the door at 6, and he was already up, and she would put 2 pieces of bread in the toaster and stand at the counter with her back against it while it cooked, too tired to sit, and she would ask him how school was, and he would say, "Fine," and they would both let the lie stand, because the lie was a mercy they extended to each other. The duplex was small, 1 bathroom with a faucet that dripped, a living room with a couch the previous tenant had left, a kitchen table with 1 short leg that Eli had shimmed with a folded matchbook. The walls were thin enough that he heard her cry sometimes, late when she thought he was asleep. 2 rooms over, a sound she muffled in a pillow. He had learned the sound and learned not to go to her, because going to her would mean she had to be strong for him on top of everything else. And he did not want to be one more thing she had to lift. She did not know about Marcus Vale. Ellie had decided she would not know because she carried enough, and because telling her would make it real in a way he could not afford. There was a particular arithmetic to being the child of a tired woman. You learned to subtract yourself from the sum of her troubles. You learned which problems were yours to swallow. A bully at school was the kind of thing that, if he handed it to her, she would try to fix in the only ways available to her: a phone call to a principal who would not return it, a half-day off work she could not afford, a conversation with a school board that her son already understood belonged to the other side. So he carried it alone, the way he carried most things, and the thing he reached for in the dark when the carrying got too heavy was the memory of a man named Cole. Cole Renner was his mother's brother, and Eli had met him exactly 4 times in his life. The last time had been at his grandmother's funeral 2 summers back, when a row of motorcycles had come down the cemetery road in a slow thunder that made the folding chairs vibrate. Eli remembered it with the strange clarity of a thing witnessed by a child who does not yet understand it. The day had been overcast and close. The minister had been speaking, and then, under his words, a sound had risen, a low building roll like weather coming over a ridge, and the heads of the mourners had turned one by one toward the cemetery gate. The riders had worn black leather vests with a patch on the back, a winged skull above curved lettering, and they had come slow and stayed in a line. And they had cut their engines all at once so that the silence after was louder than the sound had been. They had stood at the edge of the grass, with their hands folded and their heads bowed, and not one person in that graveyard had said a word against them. Not the minister, not the funeral director, not the aunts who whispered about everything. There was a power in the way they held still that Eli, at 12, had felt without having words for. Cole had knelt by him afterward, a big man gone soft in the eyes, smelling of road and leather and faintly of cigarettes, and he had pressed something into the boy's hand. It was a small brass coin, worn smooth, stamped with the same winged skull. "Carry this," Cole had said, his voice a low gravel that Eli felt in his sternum more than heard. "If you ever need me, you call. Family finds family." He had closed Eli's small fingers around the coin with his own scarred hand and held them closed for a moment, the way you press a thing into memory. Then the motorcycles had thundered away down the cemetery road, the sound diminishing by degrees until it was gone, and Cole had become a phone number on a folded scrap of paper and a coin Eli kept in the bottom of his sock drawer. He had not called pride, partly, and partly because the number was 2 years old, and Eli did not believe, in the cold arithmetic of a boy who had been left before, that the man on the other end would still answer. So when Marcus Vail had cornered him by the lockers on the 8th day and taken the $4 his mother had given him for lunch, and when Marcus had asked, grinning, who was going to stop him, Eli had said the thing he half believed and half only wished. "My uncle is a Hell's Angel." The words had felt like armor for 1 second. For exactly 1 second. Now it was the 9th day, and the laugh still hung in the air, and Marcus Vail was leaning closer. "Your uncle," Marcus said, drawing the word out, savoring it. "Your uncle. Sure, my uncle's the president." The table laughed again. Marcus was 15, held back a year, already broad through the chest, with the early bulk of a boy who would be a large man. His father owned 3 car dealerships and sat on the school board, and everyone at Cedar Hollow understood what that meant without anyone ever having to say it. Marcus had broken a boy's finger in 6th grade, and nothing had happened. Marcus had put a smaller kid's head through the drywall of the locker room in 7th grade, and the drywall had been quietly repaired, and the smaller kid had quietly transferred. Marcus Vail lived inside an armor of money and connections so complete that he had never once felt the floor give way beneath him. Eli did not answer. He picked up his tray, and his hands were steady, which surprised him. He carried it to the return window and scraped it clean and walked out of the cafeteria with the laughter following him like smoke. Behind him, 2 tables over, a girl named Priya Nair lowered her phone. She had filmed the whole thing, the way she filmed a lot of things, because Priya was building a case she did not yet know was a case. She had transferred to Cedar Hollow in the spring, and she had been the smaller kid before Eli was the smaller kid, and she had learned that the only weapon a powerless person owns is a record. Tax. That afternoon, in the gap between the last bell and the long walk home, Marcus found Eli behind the gym. There were 3 of them, Marcus and 2 others, and they backed Eli against the cinder block wall where the cameras did not reach. Eli's heart slammed against his ribs. His breath came short and high. Marcus held up his own phone, and on the screen was Eli's face from the cafeteria. frozen mid-sentence, and Marcus had written words across it in fat white letters and posted it somewhere, and the number beside it was already in the hundreds. "My uncle is a Hell's Angel," Marcus read aloud in a mocking falsetto. "Everybody's seen it. You're famous." He shoved the phone into Eli's chest hard enough to bruise. "So call him. Go ahead. Call your uncle. Let's see the big bad biker come save you." Eli's hand closed around. Nothing in his pocket. The coin was at home in the sock drawer. The number was folded inside his math notebook, where he had moved it that morning without quite admitting to himself why. He said nothing. He kept his eyes on the middle distance, the way you learn to, and he waited for it to be over, and eventually it was, because the two other boys got bored and Marcus had a thing to be at. They left him there against the wall with a wet streak down one cheek that he scrubbed away with his sleeve before he let himself walk home. He did not call that night. He sat on the edge of his bed with the scrap of paper in his hand and the coin in the other, and he listened to the silence of the empty duplex. His mother gone to her shift, and he could not make himself dial. Because if he called, the number was dead, then the last thing would be gone, and a boy can survive a great deal as long as he has one last thing. So he put the paper back in the notebook and the coin back in the drawer, and he lay awake until the gray came. The video did what videos do. By the end of the week, it had traveled through every phone in the 8th grade and most of the 7th, and the 5 words had become a chant, a thing other kids said to him in the halls in a sing-song, a thing scrawled on the whiteboard in homeroom before the teacher rubbed it off. Marcus had turned Eli's one piece of armor into the joke of the entire school. And here was the thing about Marcus Vail that the story has to be honest about, because it is the engine of everything that follows. He did not do it out of any particular hatred. He did it because it was easy, and because it was funny, and because, in 15 years, no one had ever shown him there was a price. Cruelty for Marcus was simply a thing the world permitted, like gravity. What Marcus did not know, what no one at Cedar Hollow Middle School knew, was that the duplex on the edge of Black Fork sat 9 miles from a road called Sutter Grade, and that, at the top of Sutter Grade, was a long, low building of cinder block and corrugated steel with a gravel lot out front, and that on most nights that gravel lot held a row of motorcycles parked in a clean, disciplined line, chrome catching the sodium glow of a single tall lamp. The building had no sign. The men who used it called it the chapter house. And the man who sat at the head of the scarred oak table inside it, the man whose word in that building was the only law that mattered, was a heavy-set bearded figure, well past 60, named Royce Tillman, whose leather cut read President above a winged skull, and who had 26 years earlier stood up at the wedding of a younger man named Cole Renner as that young man took his vows to the club. Cole, it turned out, had not let the number die. It happened on a Tuesday. Dana Renner came home from her night shift to find her son sitting at the kitchen table, not eating the cereal in front of him, the milk gone warm and the flakes gone soft. And she stopped in the doorway with her bag still on her shoulder and read the whole thing in the set of his back. She set the bag down slow. She sat down across from him in her scrubs, with her cracked hands flat on the table, and she said his name once, quietly, just Eli, and waited. She had raised him alone, and she knew the shape of his silences, knew the difference between the silence of a boy who was tired and the silence of a boy holding something that was eating him from the inside. This was the second kind. And Eli, who had carried it for 2 weeks, who had decided she would never know, broke. It came out of him in pieces out of order, the $4 first, and then the video, and then back to the wall behind the gym, the chant, the locker glued shut, the backpack in the toilet, the 5 words he had said and the laugh that had answered them. His voice did not stay level. Halfway through, he put his face in his hands and his shoulders went, and Dana did not reach across to him. Not yet, because she understood that he needed to get all of it out onto the table before he could stand to be touched. She listened without moving. When he finished, she sat for a long moment with her jaw working, and the thing that moved across her face was not the helpless grief he had been protecting her from. It was something harder. She got up and she walked to the drawer by the phone, and she took out a folded scrap of paper of her own, soft at the creases from being folded and unfolded, because of course she had kept the number 2, had kept it for 2 years the way you keep a thing you hope you never have to use. "I'm calling my brother," she said. "Mom, don't. He won't even—" "Eli?" She had the receiver in her hand. "There is exactly one person on this earth who has never once let this family down when it counted, and it is the person you've been ashamed to call, and that ends this morning." And she dialed it before Eli could tell her not to, her finger steady on each number, her eyes on her son. A voice answered on the second ring, low. "Gravel. Awake at 6 in the morning, the way men who have ridden all their lives are awake." "Dana," Cole said, and there was a whole history in the way he said it. The years and the distance and the funerals. The things between a brother and sister who love each other and have not known how to be in the same room. She told him. She told him all of it, her voice cracking once and then holding. And on the other end of the line, Cole Renner did not say much. He said, "Where is he hurt?" She said, "He's not where it shows." There was a long silence, long enough that she thought the call had dropped. Then Cole said the thing that would set the whole machine in motion. He said, "Don't go to the school. Don't call the school. Don't do one single thing. Let me make a call." And he hung up. Here is what Cole Renner understood that Dana did not, and that Eli could not have. He understood that walking into that school as an angry uncle in a leather cut was exactly what Marcus Vale's father wanted, because it would let him reframe the whole thing. A biker threatening a child on school grounds. It would put Eli back under the wheel and put Cole in a cell. Cole had spent 30 years learning how power actually behaves, and he knew that the Vale family's armor was not muscle. It was paper and reputation, and the quiet understanding among the comfortable people of Black Fork that some children matter and some do not. You did not break that armor with your fists. You broke it by making the cost of wearing it unbearable in full view where the comfortable people had to watch. So, Cole did not ride to the school. He rode to the chapter house at the top of Sutter Grade up the gravel road in the early light, with the dew still burning off the field below, and he sat down across the scarred oak table from Royce Tillman, and he laid it out plain. The room was empty, but for the two of them, the neon of the old beer sign behind the bar buzzing faintly, the smell of last night's cigarettes still in the air. Royce listened the way old presidents listen, with his rings catching the light and his eyes half closed and his big hands wrapped around a mug of black coffee, not interrupting once. Cole told him about the boy, about the funeral coin, about the $4 and the video and the wall behind the gym. He told him about the father, the dealerships, the school board, the way the whole town bent around the Vale name. When Cole was done, the old man was quiet for a long moment. A truck passed somewhere down on the highway and faded. Then Royce said, "The boy carries your name." It was not a question. Cole said, "Yes." Royce turned the mug a quarter turn on the wood. "And you didn't come in here last night wanting to drive down there and put your hands on a 15-year-old child. It was not a question either." But Cole answered it. "No," he said. "I want it done right. I want it to stick. I want that boy to be able to walk that hallway for the next 4 years." Royce nodded slowly, and something in his weathered face approved of the answer. "Then it's not your business," the old man said. "It's the club's business." Wah! And that was the verdict delivered across a coffee mug in an empty room. And it meant that what had been one man's nephew was now something the whole charter would stand behind. That a boy 9 miles away who did not yet know any of this had in the space of one sentence stopped being alone in the world. Royce Tillman had not built the chapter on Sutter Grade by being a stupid man. He had a younger member, a lean, watchful man of 31 named Deacon, who wore the Sergeant-at-Arms patch, and who, before the leather, had spent 6 years doing things with computers that the government had paid him for, and then, when the paying stopped, had simply— Royce called Deacon to the table. "Find out who this family is," he said. "All of it, the clean parts and the dirty parts. We don't move until we know the ground." Deacon nodded once and left, and the precision of biker justice, the thing that separated it from a mob, began its quiet work. What Deacon found over the next 9 days was a portrait of the Vale family that the comfortable people of Black Fork would never have recognized. He worked the way he always worked, at a desk in the back room of the chapter house, 2 screens glowing in the dark, a cigarette burning down, untouched in a tin ashtray, the rest of the building quiet around him. He did not break anything. That was the thing the movies got wrong, he liked to say. The only time he said much of anything. Almost everything a careful man needed was already public, already sitting in a filing cabinet or a county database or a court docket, waiting for someone patient enough to read it and honest enough to see what it added up to. Gerald Vale, Marcus's father, owned 3 car dealerships, sat on the school board, and chaired the booster club that funded the middle school's athletics. He was, on paper, a pillar. He sponsored the Little League. His name was on a plaque in the school lobby. He gave a speech every fall about the value of community. Deacon was not interested in the speeches. He pulled the public filings on the dealerships and found a pattern of complaints, settled quietly, from customers who had been sold cars with rolled-back odometers and salvage histories scrubbed from the records. 12 complaints in 4 years, each one settled with a payment and a signature that closed the person's mouth. He found a county inspector named Hollis who had signed off on the dealership lots for 3 years running, and whose wife had, in that same span, received a no-show salary from a Vale holding company, $18,000 a year for a job that had no office and no hours and no description. He found that the Booster Club's books, which Gerald Vale alone controlled, did not add up, and that a sum of roughly $40,000 that had been raised in the community's name for the school, raised at pancake breakfasts and car washes and donation jars on the counters of every business in town, had gone, instead, into a renovation of the Vale family's lake house, a new dock and a boathouse, and a stone patio. None of it was visible from the outside. All of it was real and documented, and sitting in places a patient man could reach. Deacon printed it. He put it in order. He made copies and copies of the copies, and he carried it to the scarred oak table and laid it in front of Royce Tillman without a word, and the old president read it slowly, page by page, his rings catching the lamplight. And when he was done, he set his hand flat on the stack and left it there a moment, the way a man rests a hand on something settled. This is the part the story will not rush, because it is the part that matters. The club did not go to Marcus Vale. A 15-year-old was not the enemy. A 15-year-old was a symptom. The enemy was the armor the whole structure of money and silence, and bought officials that had taught Marcus from birth that there was never a price. And so the club moved, not against the boy, but against the structure. And the genius of it was that the structure would dismantle itself in daylight, with the comfortable people watching, the moment the right facts were placed in the right hands. While Deacon worked, Eli's life went on inside its small hell. The video aged into the next thing, and then aged back, resurrected whenever Marcus was bored. There was a morning when Eli found his locker glued shut. There was an afternoon when his backpack went into the toilet. He told no one because Cole had said to wait, and Eli had learned against every instinct to trust the waiting. The waiting was its own kind of wait, and there were nights he took the brass coin out of the drawer and held it until the edges left marks in his palm. The girl, Priya, found him one of those mornings sitting alone on the low wall by the bus loop. She sat down 2 feet away, not too close, and she did not say anything for a while. The buses came in one after another and breathed their doors open, and the other kids streamed past in their clusters, and the two of them sat outside the stream, the way the marked ones learned to. Then she said, "I have all of it. On my phone. The cafeteria. The day by the gym, I got that through the fence. The locker, I have it stamped with dates." Eli looked at her. She was a small girl with a serious face and a cracked phone case, held together with tape, and a way of watching a room that he recognized, because it was his own way of watching a room. "Why?" he said. Priya looked out at the buses. "Because last year, it was me," she said. "And nobody had anything. It was just my word against his, and his word came with his dad, and so it was nothing." She turned the phone over in her hands once, twice, a small nervous motion. "They made me apologize. Did you know that? I went to the office because he wouldn't stop, and they brought us both in, and somehow at the end of it, I was the one who said sorry to him, with his father standing there in his nice suit being so reasonable about it." She said the word reasonable like it tasted of metal. "I went home and I figured out that the only thing they can't argue with is a thing they can see. So I started recording everything. Not just for me, for whoever was next." She turned and looked at him, then direct. "You're next." So she held the phone up an inch. "It isn't nothing if you can see it. That's the whole trick. You make it so they have to see it." Eli did not fully understand then what she was offering, or how it would fit into the larger thing already moving 9 miles away at the top of a gravel road. He gave her the only thing he had that felt like trust. He told her about his uncle, the real one, not the joke. And Priya did not laugh. She listened to the way she filmed, carefully, all the way to the end, and then she said only, "Good. Then there's 2 of us and 1 of him." And she stood and shouldered her bag and went in to first period, and for the first time in 9 days, Eli walked into the building behind someone instead of alone. 2 days later, Cole came to the duplex. Not on the motorcycle, not in the cut. He came in an old pickup in a flannel shirt, and he sat at the kitchen table with his sister and his nephew and a cup of coffee gone cold, and he was, in that small kitchen, just a large, soft-eyed man who looked at the boy like the boy was made of something precious. "I owe you an apology," Cole said to Eli. "I gave you a coin and a number, and I rode off, and I should have been around. That's on me." Eli did not know what to say. Cole reached across the table and put the brass coin down, the one from the sock drawer, because Eli had given it to his mother to give to him, a small returning of trust. Cole pushed it back. "No," he said, "it's yours. It was always yours. You earned it the day you didn't call me. To come hit somebody. You called for help, and you waited. That's the hard part. Most grown men can't do the hard part." Then he told Eli in plain words a boy could hold what was going to happen. Not the details, just the shape. "Nobody is going to touch that boy who hurt you," Cole said. "We don't hurt children. The thing that made him think he could, the thing behind him. We're going to take the legs out from under it. And you're not going to have to do anything but be there when it falls." The falling began on a Thursday night at a meeting of the school board in the multipurpose room of Cedar Hollow Middle School under the flat, fluorescent light, with maybe 40 people in folding chairs. Gerald Vale sat at the long table at the front with the other board members in a crisp blue suit and polished shoes, the picture of a man who had never once doubted he belonged at the front of a room. The agenda was routine, a budget line, a calendar vote. Then, a man none of them recognized stood up during the public comment period. A heavy-set, bearded man, past 60 in a plain dark jacket, and he introduced himself only as a concerned member of the community, and he asked in a low gravel voice that carried to every corner of the room whether the board was aware that approximately $40,000 raised by the Booster Club for the children of this school had been spent on a private lake house. The silence that swept through the room was immediate and suffocating. Gerald Vale smiled, the smile of a man reaching for armor that has always been there. He said something about misinformation, about troublemakers, about how this was not the appropriate forum. And the heavy-set man simply nodded and sat down. And that was when the second part happened, because Deacon had spent 9 days making sure it would not be one man's word in a room. A woman in the third row stood up and identified herself as a reporter for the county paper and said she had documents. A man near the back stood and said he had bought a truck from Vale Motors with a rolled-back odometer and had the paperwork. Priya Nair, 14 years old, stood up in the second row with her cracked phone in her steady hand, and she said, "I have video of what his son does to kids at this school, and I have dates, and I would like the board to watch it." And the comfortable people of Black Fork, who had spent years agreeing not to see, found that they could no longer not see, because the seeing had been placed in front of them all at once, in daylight, exactly as Cole had promised. Gerald Vale's armor did not break all at once. It broke the way ice breaks, a crack, and then a web of cracks, and then the whole sheet gone. The county inspector, Hollis, was named. The no-show salary was named. The settled complaints were named. Each fact landed on the table like a stone, and with each one, Gerald Vale grew smaller in his crisp blue suit, and the people in the folding chairs turned in their seats to look at him, and the looking was the thing he had never once in his life had to endure. He stood up. He said the meeting was out of order. No one moved to agree with him. The board chair, an elderly woman who had served 20 years and had quietly hated being made complicit, said into her microphone that perhaps Mr. Vale should step down from the board pending an inquiry, and the words went into the record, and there was no taking them back. Eli was there. He sat in the back row between his mother and the large, soft-eyed man in the plain, dark jacket, and he watched the man who owned the town shrink, and he felt no triumph, which surprised him. He felt something quieter and stranger. He felt the floor, which had been tilted his whole life, come slowly level. The story is not finished, because a cornered animal lashes out, and Gerald Vale was nothing, if not a man who believed his armor would hold one more time. He found out the way that connected, find out things, who the heavy-set man at the meeting had been. He found out about Sutter Grade. And 4 days later, on a bright, hard Monday, he drove his immaculate car up the gravel road to the chapter house in his crisp suit and his polished shoes, with a lawyer's letter in his hand and a county sheriff's deputy named Trask following in a cruiser, because Gerald Vale intended to reframe the whole thing the way he had reframed everything. As bikers threatening a respectable family, and he intended to do it with the law standing beside him. He had made the one mistake the story has been pointing at from the beginning. He had walked into the biker world, believing the rules that protected him out there still applied in here. They did not. Royce Tillman met him in the gravel lot, in the flat, blinding midday sun, with a dozen members standing in a loose, silent line behind him, none of them moving, none of them speaking, their cuts dark against the bright morning. Gerald Vale began to talk. He talked about defamation, about harassment, about the letter in his hand, about the deputy at his shoulder. And Royce Tillman let him talk the way you let a man finish digging. When Gerald ran out of words, the old president said one thing. He nodded toward the deputy. "Trask," he said, "you want to tell this man why you're not going to do anything for him today, or do you want me to?" And the deputy Trask went pale, because Deacon had found him too, found the favors and the looking away. And the deputy understood in that instant that the leverage in this lot did not run the direction Gerald Vale thought it did. Trask got back in his cruiser. He drove away. He left Gerald Vale standing alone in the gravel, in his polished shoes, in the blinding sun, with a useless letter in his hand and a dozen silent men watching him. And the armor was simply gone, all of it peeled away to nothing. And what stood there was only a frightened man who had finally found the floor he had spent his life pretending did not exist. Royce Tillman did not threaten him. He did not have to. He said in his low gravel, "You're going to go home. You're going to resign from that board. You're going to make the Booster Club whole, every dollar. And you're going to keep your boy away from the Renner kid and away from the Nair girl and away from every other kid you taught him he could touch. The reporter has copies of everything. So do we. You understand me?" Gerald Vale, who had never begged for anything, who had never needed to, heard himself say yes. He said it twice. Then he got in his immaculate car and drove back down Sutter Grade into the world that had been his, and found, over the following weeks, that it was his. No longer Gerald Vale, resigned from the board. The booster funds were repaid, all 40,000, with a quietness that fooled no one. The county opened an inquiry into Vale Motors and the inspector Hollis. Marcus Vale was not arrested, was not beaten, was not touched. Marcus Vale walked into Cedar Hollow Middle School the following Monday, into a school that had watched his father shrink, and he found that the thing that had made him untouchable had evaporated, and that a 15-year-old without armor is just a frightened boy who never learned to be anything else. The chant stopped. The video died. No one laughed when Eli Renner walked down the hall, because everyone had seen, finally, where the laughing led. There is a coda, and it belongs to a Saturday 3 weeks later, at the top of Sutter Grade, where the gravel lot held its clean line of motorcycles in the long gold light of late afternoon. Eli Renner stood at the open door of the chapter house, with his uncle's hand on his shoulder, and he was not afraid, which was the strangest thing of all. Inside, at the scarred oak table, Royce Tillman sat with a cup of black coffee. And when the boy came in, the old man looked up and studied him for a long moment with his half-closed eyes. Then he reached into his cut and took out something small and set it on the table and slid it across the scarred oak. It was a brass coin, worn smooth, stamped with the winged skull, the twin of the one in Eli's pocket. "Your uncle carries one," Royce said. "Now, you carry two. One you earned by waiting. The other you earned by standing in that back row and not gloating when you had the right to. He pushed it the last inch. That's the part most men never learn. You had him on the ground. You let him get up and walk out on his own legs. That's the difference between us and them. Eli picked up the second coin. It was warm from the old man's pocket. He closed his hand around it and felt the edges press into his palm, the way the first one had all those sleepless nights. Except now it did not feel like the last thing he owned. It felt like the first thing of something larger. Cole walked him out to the lot afterward into the gold light, past the long line of chrome and leather, and the men nodded at the boy as he passed. Small nods, no words, because their warmth had always been a thing of action and not speech. Dana waited by the old pickup, her cracked hands shading her eyes against the sun, and she watched her son walk down the line of motorcycles with his uncle, and she watched the men nod, and she understood that whatever else happened, the floor under her boy was level now and would stay level because a family had decided he was theirs. Eli climbed into the truck. Through the open window he could smell the dust and the warm chrome and the faint sweetness of cut grass from the field below, and it smelled, he thought, like being kept. Cole started the engine. Down the grade, in a town that had spent years agreeing not to see, the comfortable people were learning to see, and a boy who had once said 5 words as a wish was riding home with 2 coins in his pocket and an uncle who had answered, "After all," on the second ring. If this story moved something in you, if you have ever been the small one in the back row waiting for someone to answer, stay a moment and let it sit. Leave a word below for the boy you used to be and for the one who finally picked up the phone. We will be here at the top of the grade when you come back.